driving the auto industry into a recession. GM shares are down 5%. We're sitting around the desk looking at the declines in the automakers as President Trump is speaking.
GM stock dropped 5%. Dow Jones lost over 540 points. The price of cars could increase by $4,000 to $10,000 with just one statement from Trump. Is the U.S. market on the brink of recession?
To make the 25% tariffs on car parts from Mexico and Canada could add between $10,000 in costs, depending on the vehicle.
No car is 100% made in USA. This is something most American consumers don't realize. Every car, even those in the U.S., relies on parts imported from Canada and Mexico. Therefore, when Trump imposed tariffs on imports from these countries, the entire U.S. automotive industry has to bear the. According to data from think tank Anderson Economics, the production cost of electric cars in the U.S. could rise from $1,500 to $12,000 per vehicle, depending on the type. An electric car produced in the U.S. could increase in price up to $12,000, a hefty amount. And who pays the price for this? It's the American consumers, who will bear the full burden of these rising costs. This will increase the cost of living for Americans, while the automotive industry is already in crisis. Experts predict that the U.S. economy will continue to shake as stocks of automotive companies plummet, and the recession forecast becomes clearer than ever.
President Trump announced 25% tariffs against our auto industry. And this is a direct attack, to be clear, a direct attack on the very workers that I stood in front of. Uniform workers I stood in front of this morning.
Canada, as a key trade partner, did not remain silent in the face of this tariff blow. Immediately addressing the Ambassador Bridge, the iconic connecting the U.S. and Canada, he strongly criticized the new tariff policy, calling it a direct attack on Canadian workers. And more importantly, he clearly stated the economic, security, and military cooperation between the U.S. and Canada. It's over. Canada decided not to stay silent. Cutting reliance on the U.S., expanding global trade relations, and retaliating with tariffs that are multiple times stronger. This is a diplomatic SLAP without shout, but one that gradually hits every citizen, every business, and the entire. Not only Canada, but Europe also could not remain silent in the face of this move. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen condemned Trump's decision, calling it a stupid blow to the global supply chain. And not just Europe. Even Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario.
To make sure we take a Team Canada approach to this, but I can tell you we just aren't going to roll over. We're going to retaliate, and he's going to feel the pain from the American people.
This not only escalates tensions between countries, but also threatens the stability of the global supply chain, especially in the automotive industry. International markets are facing significant risks as political decisions directly impact prices and the development of the automotive industry. With all these turmoil and fluctuations, can the economy truly become great again, as Trump once promised? The answer is likely no longer as clear as before. Experts argue that this tariff policy not only makes things difficult for the automotive industry, but also affects the entire economy. With car manufacturers being forced to raise prices, consumers will spend less, leading to a demand for goods and services. With this instability, many experts warn that Trump may be pushing the U.S. economy into recession, especially as the stock market continues to plummet. Dow Jones losing over 540 points in just one day, investors have started to pull back. So, when one statement from Trump has shaken the entire economy, can we continue to trust in this America First strategy? 7.3 million cars, and now every single one of them faces a possible 25% import tax.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States,
if that becomes reality, what will happen to car prices in America? A direct hit on the American consumer. Over the past year, more than 7 million imported vehicles were sold in the U.S., a number that clearly shows how heavily America depends on foreign-made cars. But now, with a proposed 25% import tax on the table, the entire auto market could be heading into a period of major turbulence. Automakers will respond quickly. Some may begin on incentives, others could pause shipments altogether, especially for models specifically for the U.S. market. The most immediate impact. Car prices are expected to surge, from an average of $49,000 to as high as $52,000 or even $53,000. With that kind of increase, millions of Americans will likely delay their car buying plans or shift to used vehicles instead. And if that trend spreads, the broader consumer market could face a significant slowdown, with ripple effects far beyond the auto industry. Bringing manufacturing back to America. Easy to say, hard to do. A common response to new tariffs is the familiar call, bring manufacturing back to America. It sounds simple, but the reality? Far more complicated. Even under the best conditions, building a new auto plant in the US takes at least 2.5 to 3.5 years before it becomes operational. And it's not just about construction. Structuring an entire production system brings added cost, from reworking supply chains to retraining engineers to updating core technologies. To that, America's higher labor and operating costs, and it becomes much harder to compete with lower-priced imports. In short, reshoring production isn't a quick fix, and without long-term policy support, American consumers. Market reaction. No need to wait for the policy to take effect. The market reacted instantly. In just one trading session, General Motors shares dropped 5%, Ford lost 3%, and Stellantis followed the downward trend. These numbers aren't just short-term jitters. They reflect a deep, long-term concern among investors. Clear understanding that rising production and import costs will shrink profit margins dramatically. One auto industry executive even warned, this policy pushed the entire sector into recession. And with ripple effects across the supply chain, this isn't just an industry risk. It could hit the entire value ecosystem. Will this soothing move be enough to make a real impact? Amid promises to bring manufacturing back, it's the consumers who bear the real cost. They now face higher car prices, vanishing incentives, and fewer choices on the lot. For middle-income Americans, buying a car through financing could turn into a long-term financial burden. And as new car prices rise, used car prices follow, pushing the entire supply chain into a state of imbalance. In a market where affordable options disappear, we risk pushing the middle class further away from the dream of car ownership. The buyer is taking the hardest hit. Amid bold promises to bring manufacturing back, it's the consumers who bear the real cost. They now face higher car prices, vanishing incentives, and fewer choices on the lot. For middle incomes, buying a car through financing could turn into a long-term financial. And as new car prices rise, used car prices follow, pushing the entire supply chain into a state of imbalance. In a market where affordable options disappear, we risk pushing the middle class further away from the dream of car ownership. If this trend continues, we have to ask the hard question. Is the American dream of car ownership slipping out of reach for the very people who once defined it? Canada threatens to cut exports to the US. A looming energy crisis? The US may soon face an unprecedented energy disaster. Millions of households and businesses could lose power. Why? Canada is threatening to cut electricity exports. A direct response to Trump's 25 tariffs. Is this just a bluff? Or is the US truly on the verge of an energy crisis? US-Canada trade war takes a dangerous turn. The US-Canada trade has been simmering for years, but in February 2025, the Trump administration made a bold move, reinstating a 25% tariff on steel, aluminum, and other key imports from Canada and Mexico. Objective? To protect industries, reduce imports, and boost domestic production. But Canada refused to stay silent. On March 2025 in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford issued a warning. If the US continues its unfair tariff policies, we won't hesitate to cut electricity exports. Less than 24 hours later, Prime Minister Justin's administration responded, the US must not underestimate Canada. If they tax our goods, we have ways to retaliate. But can Canada really pull the plug on the US? Can Canada actually cut off US electricity? Each year, Canada exports 5 terawatt-hours of electricity to the US, making up around 10% of US electricity imports. Which states would be hit the hardest? New York, Vermont, Michigan, Minnesota. Economic impact of an electric cutoff. Electricity prices skyrocket by 30 to 50% in affected regions. US manufacturing, especially in the auto and tech industries, could face major disruptions. Household record-breaking utility bills. But can Canada flip the switch overnight? Not that simple. The North American power grid is deeply integrated. Shutting off power instantly is impossible. Canada also depends on electricity revenue. 2024 exports to the US were worth $2.3 billion.